Hi, welcome at Tricks. I'm Helen and today we're looking at genetic inheritance, genetic variation, and we're also going to have a look at a whole lot of genetics crosses. So I hope you're ready to do some interesting work today and look at these ideas. So let's begin with inheritance. Each individual inherits a variety of characteristics from his or her mother and father. And so I'm sure you've been to family gatherings where people will look at the children and say, well, they clearly belong to that set of parents because there's some kind of a likeness. There's some characteristics that are very clearly present in the parents as well as in the offspring. So I think you're very familiar with the idea that you tend to look in some way like your parents. Inheritance isn't only something that happens in humans or in animals. There's inheritance in plants as well. Plants will inherit things, for example, like their flower color or their height or the seed size or the seed shape, the fruit, the color of the fruit, the size of the fruit. All of these things are what we call inherited characteristics. Now, we have different species that share characteristics, but even within the human species, or any species for that matter, all individuals are not alike. There's a huge range of characteristics that, although we all have eyes, they're differently shaped. They see differently as well. They have different colors. We're all range in height. We have different shaped hair. We have different texture to our hair, color to our hair. So although we're a species, there's a great deal of variation, even amongst those characteristics that are inherited. And we call this study of the way in which we inherit, or the mechanisms of inheritance and variation, we call this study genetics. So, some definitions for you: inheritance, the characteristics that are transmitted from the parent to the offspring, and variation, although those characteristics are inherited, there are differences in the offspring. And I think you only have to look at your siblings. If you have brothers and sisters, although you inherit characteristics from your parents, both of you, there will be variation between the two of you, unless of course you're identical twins. So a nice way of looking at this idea of inheritance and variation is to look at the dog species. All dogs belong to one species, and even though they all belong to one species, we get huge ranges of variation in terms of what the dogs look like, their size, their color, and these inherited characteristics can be traced right back to probably the original dogs, which looked something like a wolf. And through selective breeding, we have extended the range of what this wolf-like animal looked like to suit our own needs, and we have this huge range of dogs that exist today, in the same way that we have a huge range of humans that all look different. So, each physical characteristic, as well as all the functions in your body and its cells, are controlled by genes. Now, we need to understand that genes control, therefore, two things, or your DNA controls two things. It controls what you look like, right? So purely structural features. And it's not only what you look like, but it's things that your body makes, things like bones, saliva, the blood, the structure of the blood. Structural things are controlled by the DNA and the genes, as well as how all those structures function, also controlled by the genes. So not only do you inherit the characteristics concerning the way you look or you appear, but you also inherit the characteristics that enable you to function as an organism. And you need to remember, of course, that the genes on your DNA were inherited from your parents. Now, some of these genes you inherit will actually never show variation. For example, you inherit genes that help you make blood tissue or bone tissue, or genes that control the way in which you digest your food. Those genes will never show variation. All those human genes are identical. But other genes that allow you to show variation in terms of your hair color, eye color, the shape of your ears, and so on, those genes, variation does occur. And you also need to remember that not all of your characteristics are in fact inherited by genetic instructions received from your parents. Some of your characteristics will be the result of the environment. For example, you may fall and you get a terrible scar on your leg. That is not an inherited characteristic, and you won't pass that characteristic on to your children. So if you have pierced ears, your children won't have pierced ears when they're born. If you have a tattoo, your children won't inherit that, because those are environmentally acquired characteristics. You need to be sure that you understand the difference between inherited characteristics and acquired characteristics. And when we come back after the break, we're going to be looking at these inherited characteristics in a great deal more detail. So I'll see you in a minute or two.